Hi, my name is Brenda Davis, registered dietitian and co-author of Becoming Vegan Express Edition and Becoming Vegan Comprehensive Edition, and many other books as well. Today I'd like to share a little bit about whole grains, and most people understand that refined grains can be very damaging to human health because when we refine a grain, we're removing most of what is of value to health. And then, of course, nobody eats a bowl of white flour. We add back a bunch of things like sugar and salt and fat and artificial coloring and preservatives and additives, and then we eat the white flour. So what we know now is that when we design a diet that is very high in refined carbohydrates, it increases our risk of disease, and this is of course not a good thing. We encourage people to eat whole grains. Canada's Food Guide and the American Choose My Plate both recommend that at least half of your grains should be whole grains. I would suggest that all of your grains should be whole grains if possible, generally for most people. But what a lot of people don't understand is even within the realm of whole grains, there are many different qualities of whole grains because we do things with the whole grain. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about the whole grain hierarchy. So at the very top of the hierarchy, the very best whole grains that you could eat are what we call intact whole grains. And when I say intact whole grains, I'm talking about grains that are just as they are when they're picked off the plant. So things like kamut berries and oat groats, buckwheat, barley, wild rice, black rice, brown rice, and even better than intact whole grains are intact whole grains that have been sprouted. Because when we soak and sprout a grain, what happens is we reduce the anti-nutrients. These are the compounds that will prevent us from absorbing the most valuable nutrients in the plant. The other thing that happens is the stored forms of nutrients are released and we get an explosion of phytochemicals. And phytochemicals are plant compounds that can really help to protect human health. So you can see here we've got sprouted quinoa, and quinoa, when you sprout a grain, really all you have to do is soak it for a day, and then you drain the water and you begin the sprouting process, and something like quinoa will sprout within a day. If you're sprouting kamut berries or buckwheat or spelt berries or something like that, it'll take a couple of days. But it is a wonderful thing to use in salads and even in a cereal bowl. So that's at the very top of the whole grain hierarchy. The next level, one step down, is what we call cut grains. And cut grains are things like bulgur, and this is steel cut oats. You might know Red River cereal or 12-grain cereal, 7-grain cereal. These are what we call cut grains. And cut grains are almost as good as intact whole grains, but not quite, because whenever we decrease the surface area and we break down the grain, we're actually exposing the nutrients, and we get some reduction of nutrients and some increase in the rate of absorption of the sugars in those grains. So it's not quite as good, but it's just one step down. Next on the list, you would have rolled whole grains, and we're talking about things like rolled oats. This is rolled kamut, rolled quinoa, rolled buckwheat. You can roll almost any grain, and again here, when you roll a grain, you're increasing the surface area, you're exposing the nutrients to some reduction, and also you're increasing the rate at which your body can break that grain down and it can be absorbed. So the glycemic impact, or the impact on your blood sugar, increases as you progressively go down the whole grain hierarchy. Next on the list would be shredded grains, and here we're talking about things like shredded wheat or spoon-sized shredded wheat, something like that. And again, you're increasing the surface area more, and increasing the rate of absorption, but it's still a fairly good whole grain. Next we have the ground grains, and ground grains is really just another word for flour. So something like a whole wheat, organic whole wheat flour, or a buckwheat flour or rye flour. These grains they're made from intact whole grains, but they're ground into a powder, so they're very quickly absorbed into the bloodstream. And we use flours to make all sorts of things, whether it's bread or muffins or cookies or cakes. And so depending on what we add to the ground grain, that will affect the quality of the whole grain product. When we talk about intact whole grains, we talk about nothing added, nothing taken away. There's always something added when you use flour. So you need to think about what's added. The other thing is to think about if you enjoy breads, for example. When you buy a bread that's made from something like this bread, which is made from a sprouted grain, so the grain has been sprouted and then it's been made into a flour, this is going to have more nutritional value than an unsprouted grain bread. And the lighter and fluffier the bread, the more quickly it's absorbed. It's quite shocking if you think about this. Sugar has a glycemic index of about 68. Whole wheat bread has a glycemic index of about 70. White bread maybe 72, 74. And this comes as quite a shock to people, but one of the things that affects the rate at which we absorb our food is the lightness and fluffiness of that food. So bread which is yeasted, which is quite light and fluffy, will be absorbed quite quickly. The very best bread that you could eat would be a bread like this that you could pretty much stand on. This bread is full of intact grains mixed in with the flour. You can see bits of nuts and seeds. The glycemic index of a bread like this will be under 50. So this is really a good choice for bread. And you can use it in any way that you would use a regular bread. And also, of course, we have things like pastas, and it's really interesting. This is a quinoa pasta. This is a whole wheat lasagna noodle, so this is a whole wheat pasta. And what's really interesting about pasta is pasta, like bread, is made from flour. It's very, very dense, and so it takes our body a lot longer to break pasta down. It has much lower impact on our blood sugar than a similar amount of bread. So that's one of the sort of nice things about pasta, is it has a very low glycemic index. Then the next step down on the hierarchy, the whole grain hierarchy, would be something like a flaked grain. And again, to flake a grain, you're exposing the grain to a lot more pressure and a lot more processing. And so this you would get more nutrient reductions with. Of course, when you purchase a flaked cereal grain, often you have a lot of nutrients added. So it's really important to read the label, but of course you also have a lot of sugar and salt added often. And what's really interesting is if you look at a container of cereal and you look at the sodium content, for example, an ounce of potato chips has maybe 120 milligrams of sodium. An ounce of salted peanuts might have 120 milligrams of sodium. Well, 1 ounce of cereal like this would have 240 to 300 milligrams of sodium. And this comes as a shock to people, but the reason that is because when you coat the surface of a food with sodium, it tastes very strongly of salt. But when you put it through a batter, you just don't taste it in the same way. And that's what happens with flaked cereal. Now we're at the bottom of the whole grain hierarchy. And the very bottom of the whole grain hierarchy are what we call puffed grains. So we're talking about things like puffed rice, puffed wheat, Rice Krispies, even the Cheerio type cereals, or even something that people believe is just one of the healthiest foods they can eat, brown rice cakes. Now this is made from brown rice. It's a whole grain food. But if you look at the rate of absorption and the destruction of nutrients that results from the puffing process, it's actually quite shocking. A puffed rice cake might have a glycemic index of 100 in comparison to sugar, which has a glycemic index of 68. Its rate of absorption is very, very high and quick. And so these foods are the least desirable of all of the intact whole grains. So we've pretty much covered the whole grain hierarchy, and when I'm talking to people who are trying to lose weight, I draw a thick black line in the sand, especially if they want to see results quickly. And I do that for people with diabetes as well. And my thick black line in the sand is right here. I say down to rolled grains, period. My preference would be to eat only intact whole grains, at least initially. And so stop right here. Have sprouted intact whole grains and just plain old cooked intact whole grains in your salads, in your cereal, and so forth. The difference that can make for both weight loss and for blood sugar control is really quite remarkable. So, but at the very most, you need to stop at the rolled grains, and just to give yourself a boost. And finally, if for people that find that very difficult to do, definitely get rid of puffed grains and really try to limit the ground grain products as well. So that's it. I hope you found this little introduction very helpful. There is a lot more information in both Becoming Vegan Express Edition and Becoming Vegan Comprehensive Edition. I hope you'll pick up a copy, and thanks so much for listening.